Again, thank you for joining us. We are going to be discussing strategies for effective water stewardship today. We do have a few notes before we get started. We do want to let everyone know that the chat function is enabled for you to submit questions. Please feel comfortable doing that. They will only be visible to the presenters, not to the whole group of attendees. And we are recording this. So if you do have to step away or leave before it's over, we will have this available. It might be a couple of days. We're going to put it up on our website so that anyone can access it, but we'll also be sending out an email with a link to it, as well as some other links from the presentation as well. So please be on the lookout for those. We have updated our program a little bit since we first emailed everyone about the event. So I'm going to give a quick rundown of who we've got today. First, we'll have an introduction from Noelle Cremers, Director, Environmental and Regulatory Affairs with the Wine Institute. Then we'll have Frost Protection Best Practices with Chen, Integrated Vineyard Systems Advisor, University of California, A&R, Sonoma, Mendocino, and Lake. Then we'll have Irrigating Vineyards in a Changing Climate with Bryan Rahn, Coastal Viticultural Consultants. We'll also have Voluntary Actions and Ongoing Relations with the State Water Board from Weiss of Bella Vista. And Water Efficiency Tools and Resources with Allison Jordan of the Wine Institute and CSWA. And we also have NRCS Assistance Programs for Natural Resources Conservation with Erica Lundquist of the Lake County District Conservationist. So we've got a lot to share today. It will likely be a couple of hours, but again, if you do have to jump off, we will be sending this to everyone after the event. All right, I'm gonna hand it over to Noelle now.
Thanks, Megan. My name's Noelle Cremers, and I'm with Wine Institute. And I wanted to share an apology. Michael Miller with the California Association of Wine Grape Growers wanted to share his regrets that he can't join today. He's down in Los Angeles at a Cal OSHA Standards Board meeting, but I know he wanted me to let everyone know that COG is working hard on this issue in connection with Wine Institute, Lake County Farm Bureau, and Lake County Wine Growers. But I want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon to learn more about frost protection and water conservation, which are very important topics, given the recent focus on conservation for the Clear Lake hitch. And for anyone who's not familiar with the hitch, it's a large minnow that's endemic to Clear Lake, and the adults live in the lake most of the year, but each spring they travel up the tributary creeks to spawn. And to provide a bit of background, in 2014, the hitch was listed under the California Endangered Species Act, and it's been petitioned for listing under the Federal Endangered Species Act. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has said that they have to make a decision on that listing by January of 2025. So ultimately, it may be listed under both acts, but right now it has protection under California's act. The U.S. Geological Survey does annual surveys of hitch populations, and the survey in 2019, 2021, and 2022 showed very low numbers of both juveniles and adults. And this precipitous decline in their population has led to real concern that the hitch could go extinct in the near future. And Governor Newsom is very concerned about having a species go extinct under his watch, and so has urged his agencies and asked his agencies to get engaged and do what they can to try and protect the species so that it doesn't go extinct. Now, it doesn't appear that there's one specific smoking gun as to what has caused that decline, and so it's likely a mix of factors. But given the sharp decline, the State Water Resources Control Board has reached out to the wine grape growing community earlier this year to explain the need for conservation measures, and that if those conservation measures aren't taken on a voluntary basis this year, that next year they will implement regulations that will mandate certain actions, such as curtailment of groundwater pumping and diversions, as well as potentially adopting an information order that would require water users to report both groundwater pumping and any diversions to the State Water Board. Now, Wine Institute and COG have worked with local agricultural interests in Lake County to develop a voluntary conservation plan for the hitch to help improve conditions and increase the likelihood that the hitch can successfully spawn this spring, that there isn't a need then for implementation of the mandatory curtailments. Part of this plan is to share information on best practices for frost control and water conservation with local wine grape growers, which brings us to today's presentations. But before we get started on the presentation, there was a little bit of news that came out on Friday that I wanted everyone to be aware of. So on Friday, the governor issued an executive order, and I'll put a link to that in the chat once I stop talking, that streamlines the ability of farmers to divert flood flows onto their properties for the purpose of groundwater recharge. Now, I know most of the water in Lake County is obtained through groundwater pumping rather than direct diversions, but given the forecast for another atmospheric river, I just wanted everyone to be aware that that was a possibility to simplify that process if you have property adjacent to a creek that is going to go into a flood stage and you could divert to add to the groundwater this year, that could be very helpful in the long term. But I want to thank everyone who's presenting today, as well as all of you for taking time out of your busy schedule to listen and learn more about both frost protection and water conservation so that we can reduce the overall water demand and help conserve Clear Lake Hitch. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Noelle. Next up, we've got Chen.
Hi, hello everybody. Let me get my screen shared. Can you all see that?
Yes, looks great,
yes.
Chris.
Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Chen. I'm the Viticulture Advisor for Mendocino, Lake, and Sonoma counties. Talk to you about frost protection best practices today, and yeah, keep it concise and short and relevant for water usage. So I'm going to start with spring. I'm not going to talk too much about the other ones because spring frost is really the main concern that we have in most cases, usually during bud break. Bud break is, coming up here pretty soon for most grape cultivars. There are, in Lake County, we do have a lot of cultivars that will break early, but also some that will break later. Early bud break cultivars tend to be more susceptible to the spring frost damage, things like Viognier, Grenache, things that we want to avoid if we have really cold temperatures leading up to spring. And unfortunately, due to changing climates, we might start seeing bud break earlier than before. That's because bud break is really influenced by winter temperatures, usually with plants, with grapes, with most living organisms. The heat is what changes their biological function and signals, okay, it's time to reproduce, it's time to do this, it's time to do that. For bud break in grapevines, it's really winter temperatures because they require a period called quiescence, and it's a certain amount of time below a certain temperature for the buds to actually be viable. So that has been changing. There's a paper. This was a preprint in last year, but I believe it's actually been published now. But there has been recorded changes in phenological timing of events. So bud break, flowering, berry maturity, and harvest have all been about a week earlier in the past few years than they have in the past 30 years. So compared to 30, 40 years ago, they're all about a week earlier than they used to be. And this is in Central Europe, but this applies across the board here, or across the world, I would say, because grapes grow in very similar climates from place to place, Mediterranean regions, typically with very little or no rain in summer, pretty hot summers, cold summer nights, and then cold, wet winters, right? So this is a trend that we're seeing. That also makes us a little bit more susceptible to frost damage. So the key, I'm sure you're all growers, you know, preventing frost damage is the key. Once you get frost damage, there's some things you can do, and we'll go over that, but let's talk about prevention first. This is what a lot of growers do for preventing frost damage, overhead irrigation. And this is great because, you know, it prevents the tissue from getting below a certain temperature. So it's often used when we have sub-freezing temperatures in the air, and the goal is to prevent sub-freezing temperatures in the plant tissues. So what this does, overhead irrigation, is it keeps the plant tissue at a steady 32 Fahrenheit. So you don't actually get ice crystal formation in the living tissues. The ice crystals form on the outside of the living tissues. This is, you know, we typically use this when we start seeing bud break and we have green tissue. We don't want that to freeze off because we need those shoots for this year. So these ice crystals, they'll continuously form as long as you're doing it right and irrigating the entire time that the ambient temperature is below freezing. And as they freeze, they release latent heat. So the temperature never really drops below 32 Fahrenheit as long as the water is continuously freezing, right? And that's, you know, this process here of deposition, condensation, freezing, it's going from liquid to ice. So you're actually releasing heat as it's forming. The issue with this, or the concern with this, is that you need to do it the entire time frame that the temperatures are below freezing. So the water must run for that entire time frame, and it can use a lot of water. This is probably the number one problem with it in California. Excuse me. So in California, we don't have water a lot of the time. A lot of years are water restricted years or water limiting years. And, you know, from the numbers that I have and from what I've seen, for overhead frost protection, you use 0.2 to 0.4 acre feet per acre per year, depending on how many frost events you have to protect from. In context, a normal vineyard in our region will require somewhere between 0.6 and 0.8, maybe 1 acre foot of water per acre per year for just irrigation. So you're, you know, increasing it by somewhere close to 40 to 80% of the total water use that you need just to irrigate the vines. And that's pretty prohibitive, right? That's prohibitive in terms of water limited years when we don't really have water, but we need to frost protect because it's, you know, we don't want to lose these shoots coming off of the dormant buds. You only have, you know, a set number of them per bud. But another problem with this, or another concern that I would say, is that your system, your overhead irrigation system, needs to be maintained very well. Any failure of, you know, the emitter, the line, anything like that, during the period where you are frost irrigating or frost protecting with irrigation water, will actually result in worse damage to your vine because you're no longer applying the water and it's no longer freezing. It is just frozen now. So you actually do get below 32 Fahrenheit and you will lose those shoots very quickly. So, you know, this is something that originally came, I believe, from the citrus industry, protecting oranges and lemons and limes and all that. And it worked so well that we adapted it for grapevines too. But yeah, it's a use of physics and chemistry to keep your vines from freezing too hard. The other option that's most commonly used as an alternative to overhead are wind machines and frost fans. These are really useful if they're done correctly, right? They don't use any water. They have an effective area of somewhere between 10 and 15 acres, depending on your layout. So, you know, it's going to be different for the side of a hill versus a valley floor. This actually depends on temperature inversions, and I'll go over that in a minute. But the use of wind machines, the effectiveness of wind machines relies a lot upon the strength of that temperature inversion. Otherwise, you know, if there's no inversion, you're just mixing cold air with cold air. The inversion, really the minimum requirement is you need somewhere between 5 and 9 degrees Fahrenheit warmer air above the vineyard than at the cordon height, so, or at the canopy height, so about 5 feet. So what we do is we measure it between 5 feet and 30 feet to see that difference in temperature. So this is something that Mark Batney sent me earlier today. We have to figure out where these machines are going to work well. They don't work well everywhere, and we can't replace overhead frost irrigation everywhere. But we can replace it in some places. And what I want to point out here is if we're measuring the temperatures at different heights, so say 5 feet off the ground and 30 feet off the ground, if we're measuring temperatures at different heights, we're looking for inversions at higher altitudes. So you can see in this figure here, we have black is basically cordon height. The blue line is about 30 feet up in the air. And this is Mark Batney with a very tall temperature tower made out of PVC. I think this one is actually made out of metal. Very easy to put up. And what we can see is if we follow the 0 line here, 0 degrees Celsius, which is our freezing temperature, that, you know, on March 16th of whatever year this was, 2019, the temperature up at 30 feet was above freezing while the temperature at the cordon was below freezing. That's when a wind machine or a frost fan would be very useful. Same here, you know, the next day, the day after that, those are all true. For the 14th of March, this first dip here, we can see that they were both freezing. So in that case, that wouldn't have made a huge difference. And that's why this is a tricky phenomenon to get right. And it's tricky to make sure that you put these wind machines in the correct places, but, you know, also not as the only source of protection. So with an inversion, what happens basically is the cold air flows down into a low point, and because it's heavier, it lifts the warm air up, and the warm air kind of sits in the middle of 2 pockets of cold air. So you can see here the kind of relative temperature difference. So say 25 down here in the valley, 25 up at 200 feet, and 40 degrees Fahrenheit somewhere in the middle, right? And our goal here with the fans is to get that warm air and mix it around and mix it downwards so that this cold air becomes kind of equalized. It's like homogenizing soup, or like mixing soup up so that it's all the same consistency. That's kind of what I think of it as. But yeah, I mean, they work relatively well if you have the correct situation. The problem is then finding these inversion layers. This is Mark Batney, he's my colleague. He's put up these towers a lot of places and shown that not all vineyards, or, you know, just generally not all areas will have an inversion layer that's reliable from year to year. The problem here is that we also have, you know, inconsistent bud break timings, and with hotter temperatures, differences in winter temperatures, we're starting to see differences in bud break timing as well, even more so. So these inversion layers are starting to become more important, and finding the stable ones at the right time of year is what's really important. So we have to do that to figure out where we're going to put these frost fans. So yeah, these temperature inversion towers are really cool. They're really simple to make. Mark actually has a kind of blueprint on how to do it online for everyone to read. They're only a couple $100, and they can tell you if you could put a frost fan somewhere instead of using overhead frost irrigation, which would save you a lot of water. Typically, you need 2 data loggers that record temperature. Up here is an example of those data loggers. They're very easy to read and put up and pull down, and there's no moving parts. It's just you put them up there in a protective structure, you take them down, and you put them in your computer. But what they do is they measure these temperatures at different heights, and then you just record it. It's kind of something you have to do ahead of time. It's not really something you can do in the moment unless you have the sensors that have radio connectivity or Bluetooth capabilities. But these ones you have to put up and pull down, which he's actually, it seems like he's working on a flag post kind of method, which would be really good. Yeah, so you can have these 2 temperature data loggers, right? 5 feet, which would be about cordon height or canopy height, and then 35 feet. And you can see kind of where that lines up with these temperature inversions. Now, you're not hitting the warmest part of the air, and that's going to depend on where you are geographically on the side of a hill or in a valley or so on and so forth. So you can add a couple more, I mean, whatever you want to do with it. As long as you have one at 30, 35 feet and one at 5 feet, you'll be good. So, some downsides to these wind machines, they don't work everywhere. I've said that a few times. I want to make sure that's very clear. It doesn't always protect against frost, right? Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. These towers, the point of them is to figure out where they will work. They still require fuel. Instead of using water, you're using fuel, and typically it's propane. I haven't seen anyone install one like this for a long time, but typically the new ones are what they put up there, but propane or diesel, depends on what kind you have. And they have that limited affected area, right? So if you have overhead frost irrigation for frost protection, you can establish that to cover your entire vineyard, or at least do it in blocks. Where this, you need to put up several if you have more than 15 acres, right? You need to put up at least 2, one for every 10 acres or so. But no water use. So, if we're concerned about water usage, whenever it rains this much, people forget that we are constantly in a drought. Not saying you all do, but it happens. And we just need to think, water smart as we go forward. This is one of those options where it kind of fills that gap. Okay, that's the water part. Now, let's say you got frost damaged. This happened a lot last year in a lot of places. So spring frost, you should assess your damage before you do anything else. First off, look at the affected tissue type. Typically, it's green tissues. In spring, we don't see a lot of damage on the permanent wood structures, but we do see damage on the dormant buds and the early push shoots. You can see those permanent wood impacts, but typically that occurs more often when you have some kind of disease present already. So crown gall, trunk diseases, anything that affects the permanent wood tissue, that could be something to look out for. For bud injury, say that you didn't get the frost protection going at the right time. Every grapevine bud has 3, or dormant, it's actually a dormant compound bud, actually has 3 buds within it. The primary bud is what we see first, and that's what will be damaged by any frost event in spring most of the time. And that's unfortunate because it has the best potential for productivity during that year. So the primary bud is the big one in the middle there, this one. And that one is the most out there. It's the most exposed to these events. But it also tends to have 2 clusters where the secondary and tertiary buds tend to have 1. And these clusters and most of the shoot are already preformed in them. So if you lose them, the vine has these secondary buds as backups. So say you lost it, how can you tell what your impact's going to be on your yield? That's where we do bud dissections. Bud dissections can really help determine the viability of the bud and how much fruit you can expect from a certain number of buds. We recommend somewhere between 60 and 100 buds per acre per cultivar. And the way to do that is to cut them open and try and find the cluster primordia, which are translucent and very hard to find. But you can get a good estimate of how many clusters you're going to have, not the size of them, not the success of fruit set, but how many clusters are going to be per bud for your vineyard. Typically it would be 2. After a frost event, it could be 1.2, could be 1.3, it could be 1. But you can use bud dissections both in preventative and responsive ways. So preventative, you can determine how many buds to leave in case there's frost damage. So maybe you want to leave a couple extra buds. I mean, that may or may not be a good thing, but if you have 1.2 clusters per bud after a frost event, you might want a couple extra buds on there to make up that difference in fruit load. Or responsive, just to see how much damage there was from that frost event. Your active shoots, of course, are going to look like this. Your shoot tips are going to be burned, typically browned, wilting, and it could even take a few days to show if the frost event wasn't that severe, but it could still damage it, right? So no shoots, no clusters, that's pretty obvious. And then it'll reduce the vigor of the vine as a whole because those secondary and tertiary buds are not as vigorous as the primary bud, and they tend to have less clusters. Your permanent wood, yeah, often not really that visible, the damage. What really hurts is when you see these hard freezes splitting trunks open. That does happen, and that creates a point of infection for diseases. So the question here then becomes, do you want to take action or take no action when you see frost damage? Sometimes inaction is the way to go. Your cultivar can still, the shoots that are coming off those secondary buds can still produce fruit. Sometimes the buds are still intact. Sometimes the shoots are not completely lost. They die back halfway, but your fruiting zone is still safe. If you overcompensate with really severe pruning, I call it pruning, but it's really just dead tissue removal, you can actually stress the vine out, but there's consequences for not doing that as well. So with no action, if your shoot's damaged before the fruiting nodes, so above the fruiting nodes, the shoots will probably recover and you'll be fine because there's still laterals to grow from the points down below, so that whole cane can kind of reform from its lateral, so long as your clusters aren't damaged. Clusters are typically around nodes 4 to 6, depending on where you start counting. But yeah, if you don't have damage at that cluster point, then you could actually have your shoot recovered, no problem, and that's ideal, right? If you don't take any action and you retain dead material, that can also increase the risk of your diseases. Dead tissue can act as an inoculum, especially if there's something that's already in your vine, like a trunk disease. That's not a great thing to have lying around, especially on a stressed vine that was damaged by cold. Yeah, so if your shoots are typically less than 4 inches, the grower, you guys can kind of force the secondary or tertiary shoots. So imagine your entire shoot gets fried. Those secondary, tertiary shoots in the buds, the extra buds in the compound bud will be really useful for replacing that damaged shoot, but you might get a little lower yields. Try to avoid removing the shoot tip. At this point, if it's frost damage, it's probably the shoot tip that's frost damaged, but if you can avoid removing the shoot tip, it's going to prevent a lot of extra canopy management, because if you remove the shoot tip, your laterals grow. If your laterals grow, you have to, clear them off when you're doing leaf removal. And it can also lead to more secondary crop at harvest. It's kind of a trade-off here with frost damage. Do you want more pruning wood for next year, or do you want yields for this year? Your frost damaged shoot are really less likely to grow as vigorously as your non-stress shoots do. And that can result in shorter canes, smaller pruning diameter, and limited options for bud selection when you're pruning, right? So you got to think about what's going to be next year's pruning, what your goals are for next year, assuming that you don't have another frost event. Is the goal to catch up with your yields for this year, or is it to put your vineyard in a good situation for next year with good bud positioning and healthy wood? It's really important, but particularly for cane prune systems, because cane prune systems, they have their canes and they have their renewal spurs. And if you lose those renewal spurs, you have to retrain that part of the vine. That would be very bad if you ended up with, renewal spurs with 2 shoots that are a foot long. That would be terrible. So we would want to prune for better wood in that case, rather than repairing or replacing the yields lost to the frost damage. And then cultivar choice is something that can't be overlooked, and I don't think it should be ever. Different cultivars break at different times. There are early and late cultivars, depending on, it also depends on the rootstock, but generally if they're on the same rootstock, you'll see a difference by cultivar. Early cultivars like Pinots, Chardonnay, Chenin Blanc, they are probably going to get hit with frost damage a little bit worse than the late cultivars like Carignan, Sauv Blanc, and Cabernet. I put Cabernet here, probably both Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc, but yeah, I would just, make note of your cultivar in your vineyard and see which one, what the trend is for when it breaks bud. It's going to be earlier or later. You got to think about that when you're trying to assess frost damage. And then you all know time of pruning matters. Typically, if you prune later, that means bud break's going to be a little bit later. So, prune later if you think you're going to have a spring frost issue. That said, I know last year a lot of people got hit with spring frost, and we don't expect it in some places, but these extreme weather events are happening more often. We don't know when or where they're going to happen, but you just got to expect it at this point. If it's happened once, it can happen again, and that's really unfortunate. But if you can prune later, prune later, and then you can also double prune or pre-prune, which is just cutting back the shoot halfway before you prune it properly. You can do that mechanically. You can do that by hand. It's a lot easier to do with a spur prune system than a cane prune system. But it creates these sacrificial buds because the buds that are highest off the ground tend to break first. That's apical dominance in a grapevine. They're vines, they like to grow up things. So the buds that are higher up tend to get preference. So if you leave a few extra buds, then the buds that you actually want near the spur or near the arm are going to be, they're not going to break when there's a frost event. So that would be good. And then I was going to make a quick note on winter injury. I just wanted to share pictures. This doesn't mean that there's winter injury in this. I just thought it's crazy that the vines look like this right now. And that was from one of my students, Juan from Mendocino College. He sent me these photos. So I'll wrap it up. So in summary, there's two real ways that we address frost protection. There's a third that is not common, but has been studied by my predecessor, and that is using copper to get rid of ice nucleating bacteria. That is another option to reduce frost risk. It's something that I didn't go over, but I think you should, if you have time, look into that. It's very interesting, and it helps protect the vines to lower temperatures because ice doesn't form because there's nothing to form it. The ice nucleating bacteria tends to do that. So for overhead frost protection, it maintains the plant tissues at the threshold for freezing, which means that you don't get ice crystals forming in the cells themselves. So you get to keep those shoots. But it requires a lot of water, right? And this, 50% roughly of your water use for vineyard irrigation per year. If water's limiting, it makes it really hard. I've seen growers that had to do frost protection this way and end up not having enough water to finish off the season with, which is relatively common. You have to budget your water properly, and if there's too many cold days, then you might run out of water. It's also reliant on the success of your total system. So your irrigation system, your overhead sprinkler system, if anything's wrong with it and it breaks mid-evening, then whatever that was covering originally is going to get frost damaged. And then the other main option is our wind machines and using inversion layers to warm up the air. This has a lot of potential to, save water. It doesn't work everywhere, but you need to assess your site before you decide to switch systems or to include these wind machines as part of your system. These temperature inversion towers developed by Mark Batney are fantastic to record those inversions. You can do it year after year, but it's really more important when you're deciding, okay, do I want to switch these systems? I would say you probably need a few years of data before you can comfortably say there's a stable inversion layer during, early spring every year. But those towers don't go anywhere. So if you can take down those data loggers, put them back up, and they record for, depending on how often you record, they can record for a year and a half. They can record for 5 years. I would say the most frequent one, it can record for about 6 months. So you can record for about 6 months, and that'll really tell you what's going on in your vineyard, at least at the 30 feet, 10 feet, 5 feet kind of levels. And they do require fuel and only cover 10 to 15 acres each. That is a real rough estimate, those 10 to 15 acres, because I've seen them cover 20. It just depends on where it's installed and what the geography around you looks like. And then with spring frost damage, first thing is to assess if you have spring frost damage, assess what the damage is. Decide on your goal. Do you want these reduced yields with better pruning wood so you can have a better, healthier vineyard, more balanced vineyard next year? Or do you want, do you want to focus on the yields and get worse options for pruning? And then also, do you want to act and remove dead tissue, or do you want to leave it and let it grow? For winter injury, I didn't really go over this, but I do want to say it's the same kind of concept. You have to assess the damage first. Look at the cardiovascular system. If you see a dead arm, cut it off and see how it looks inside. But you might, if depending on the age of the vine, you might actually have to retrain the vine if the damage from winter injury is too bad. If you have a completely split trunk, I would consider thinking about retraining it. And these are some additional sources, and I think that's my time.
Chris, it looks like we do have a couple of questions over in the chat. The first one being, how much of the overhead frost protection water goes back into the groundwater? Do you have numbers on that?
I don't. That's a good question, and I think if I were, I don't have the answer to this, but I'm going to think this through a little bit. And it's not all going to freeze right away. Some of it is going to go back into the vineyard, into the soil profile. That's going to depend kind of how quickly it freezes on the vine, right? Because you've seen those pictures of icicles. I'm sure you've seen it in your own vineyard. You've seen icicles dripping off the vine. That's a lot of the water that's already on the vine there, and it's going to melt down and it's going to go into the soil profile. So yeah, I don't know. I would assume most of it does. It's cold enough that you're not going to start, it's not going to rapidly evaporate in the middle of summer like it would normally if you were to do that in July.
Right. Perfect. And then the other one is, do you have information on when and where micro sprayers for frost protection can be effective? For example, down to what temperature can they be used?
That is a good question. Yeah, I don't. I'm sorry. I can look up some information for y'all and send it your way. Send it, and then maybe we can share it to the participant or to the attendees for this one.
Sure. Thank you so much. Sounds great. Well, thanks again, Chris. Next, we're going to be moving on to Bryan Rahn, who will be discussing irrigating vineyards in a changing climate.
Hello, everybody. Let me get my camera adjusted here. Much better. All right. I will share my screen. And can you see that okay?
Yes, looks good.
Wonderful. First, thanks for the invitation. I appreciate the invitation to speak to you all today. I am a certified professional soil scientist, viticulturalist, crop advisor. I'm also a grape grower. So some of the technologies that I get involved with have to do with me trying to answer questions that I run into as a grower, and I find things that I think that are meaningful, and I take them out into the general growing public. What a difference a year makes. At 2022 last year, I was telling a lot of people, based upon the soil moisture, that we should be pre-irrigating. And we did. We put a lot of water on. Now, 2023 is a different story. We've had so much rain that our soil profiles, at least most everywhere we've been checking, are full. So that need for pre-irrigation isn't here this year. And that's just a difference from year to year, coming from a drought into a heavy rain year. And that's one of your first decisions in your irrigation cycle is, do I need to pre-irrigate? And soil moisture will answer that question for you. So, where a lot of people are talking about, will I ever need to irrigate in 2023? No matter how much it rains in any year, our soils will only hold so much water, and that's called available water holding capacity. Most vineyard soils can't hold enough water to meet the crop and yield demands for an entire year. And you can grow what they call dry farmed vineyards. They work, it happens, but you have to have a very high available water holding capacity site to get sufficient growth and yield. Adding irrigation water at the right time allows us to carry more crop and ripen it. So most of us will need to irrigate at some point. So, and this here is kind of a review of things that I'm just not going to delve into too much. But when do we begin irrigating? How much do we irrigate? Well, typically people use plant triggers. It's the leaf water potential, stress index, the growing tips, something like that, where there's an indication in the plant itself that says, okay, growth is slowing down, or the leaf water potential is going up, so I need to start applying water. Others will look at soil moisture. It's another way to do it. I don't particularly like soil moisture as a trigger for beginning irrigation, simply because the root systems are so extensive. It's hard to measure the entire root system to get a real good feel for when do you start. But my message here is you should have a trigger point, and the trigger point shouldn't be how hot is it outside. If the plants are growing vigorously and you're not either at your trigger point or very near your trigger point, even though it's hot and you have sufficient moisture in your soil, you probably don't need to irrigate. Vineyard's going to be fine. You can wait until you get near the trigger points, and then you begin. How much is, looking at soil moisture, looking at evapotranspiration? Again, I'm going to touch on that, but that's not what I'm here to talk about today. What I really want to delve into is how much water is needed to meet plant demand during these high heat events, because this is something that we're running into that's new, that we're getting these high heat events during the growing season, and we're trying to figure out how much water to put on. So they're becoming more prevalent, and both fruit quality and quantity can be impacted by excessive canopy and fruit temperatures. And so what can we do to help mitigate that? Now, we've been measuring canopy temperatures and fruit temperatures can help you identify or kind of guide irrigation decisions. And we've been doing that for quite a while now, and I'm going to touch on some of the things that we're doing and some of the data and what we've learned from it. This is my first canopy temperature tool. It is basically, I was out there feeling canopies, feeling the leaves, feeling the shade leaves, feeling the sun leaves. I could tell, and this is one of my running jokes, was I could guess your pressure bomb readings or your leaf water potential for cash and prizes by feeling the leaves and looking at the tips. So canopy temperatures and looking at them have been around a long while. And when I first started doing it, it was pretty primitive, but it worked. We moved on to using IR guns, and they were very helpful as well. But what we learned over the years is the leaf temperatures vary in the canopy, and collecting data in multiple areas is very difficult to do because you can't be everywhere at one time with an IR gun or anything else. So, and also determining what the response time was. I put on this much water, or how much in advance of the heat do I need to put it on? All those questions we really couldn't answer. It was kind of forensic. We go out and do some measurements before and after, but never really had something go through a heat event. So real-time canopy temperatures. That's the tool we're using now. It allows us to collect real-time leaf temperatures everywhere during the heat spikes wherever these devices are deployed. And it also allows us to look at, during the heat event, how hot did things get? Did we put enough water on, and did we put it on far enough in advance? Typically this is, I think you can see my cursor. There's a little data logger here, and we've got sensors through this canopy. So what we're measuring, what we're really after here, is when you've got this high water vapor content inside the leaf. Can you see my cursor, Megan?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. Okay, and you've got water vapor coming from this high water vapor content out to the atmosphere. And as the leaves lose this water, they cool themselves. So it's evaporative cooling. Another thing we've learned is that this air boundary layer, the temperature of this air boundary layer is very important. It's for the vines to regulate their temperatures. Okay, this is Dr. Kennedy's slide here. So here's flowering, and this is cell division. if you're irrigating during cell division in between flowering and veraison, if you're irrigating, then you're going to have more cell division, you're going to have more cells, and that's going to affect quality. If you're trying to get the largest berries you can get, then applying water during this period of time is the thing to do. However, most red varietals were holding the water off during this period of time during cell division and trying to restrict the number of cells. Then once we get past lag phase and we get into past veraison and into color and ripening, then we're a little more free to continue irrigating without over irrigating, because we need to keep these processes happening. Sugars, color, and flavor are all being developed here. So in most red varietals, you're restricting here to keep the cell division down, and then we're taking care of our canopy and making sure that the ripening process is moving forward. Okay, this is Dr. Forcell's work. She did some work that in the Lodi area, up in the hills there, and she was looking at leaf temperatures and the physiological responses of grapevines. This 40 degrees centigrade is about 104. I think she got up to about 47. I think it's about 116. These were the actual canopy temperatures in different irrigation regimes. But you see there's quite a scatter here. These are all point measurements, but as it got hotter, photosynthesis went down. As it got hotter, stomatoconductance went up, and we got more stress. So what did that do? This was a part of her presentation that really I thought was brilliant. No one had done this type of work, and this is helpful. This was what they called heat event 2, and I believe that the air temperature got to about 109 there. And these are the heavily watered. The purple and the blue are heavily watered, and the yellow one is 60% ET, wasn't irrigated as much. And as they went through that heat event, the total flavanols dropped out of the not so well watered group and stayed much higher where they applied more water. Now, that's one of the first measurements I've seen that directly looked at temperatures and grape quality. Here's another slide from 2019. Same effect. We have anthocyanins, we have color. Here's heat event 2. And the lower irrigation amount dropped out and never recovered a bit, but never quite recovered. So it had lower color. So this slide here, so the idea of cooling your vineyard with irrigation can be done in a number of ways. And we're looking at trying to cool it by irrigating it. So on this graph, this is a complicated graph. I'm just going to briefly touch on what to look at here. This scale is called a delta. If this is 0, if it goes above it, it's hotter than the ambient air temperature. If it goes below it, it's cooler. So this blue line here, you can see that the grape leaves are cooling themselves. The red line here shows that they are not, that the stomates have closed and the leaves are hotter than ambient. So we have some leaves, if this scale here is the ambient temperature, this is 90 degrees. I'm going to guesstimate that is maybe 94 degrees. So there's some leaves in this canopy that are at 94 plus 7, so you figure 101, and some other ones that are maybe 7 degrees cooler. And what I really want to bring out here, here's when we applied the water, and then the next day, in the middle of the day, the red line dropped down below, and then it's showing that now it has gone from 7 degrees warmer than ambient down to 7 degrees cooler than ambient. So we had a 14-degree change in canopy temperature through irrigation. So, and when you look at this here, when we had a heat event 2, 110, you would have some leaves that were 117 and other leaves that were 103. So when you look, in order to really evaluate what a heat event does to your fruit quality, you really got to know what your canopy is doing, because your canopy can be significantly cooler or hotter than the ambient air temperatures. Okay, the other aspect is VPD, which is vapor pressure deficit. And that's the difference between the moisture in the air and the total amount that it can hold. And just quite simply, as VPD increases, goes higher, the amount of air and water in the air goes down. And a plant needs to draw more water from the soil to maintain their canopy as VPD increases. So VPD looks at both temperature and humidity. So if you've got 30 to 40% humidity and it's 105, and another day you've got 15% humidity and 105, the effect on the vine is different. Those vines need to pull a lot more water with that low VPD and with the high VPD number in order to maintain their canopies. So we've got to look at a couple of different things. Temperature and humidity, and VPD allows us to look into the humidity part. Okay, here's some examples. We're going to look at some data. This is soil resistivity. It just shows you where soils change. I'm a soil scientist, so this is where the gravels were in this particular vineyard. These are some clayier spots, and this is loam. We looked at a number of soil moisture data and leaf temperature data in a number of areas here based upon the soil types and the varietals. This is the one here, this first one here in this kind of bluey yellow there. This is all basically loam and gravelly loam, maybe 10-15% gravel, so a higher water holding capacity site. We also collected other data, shoot lengths and soil moisture and all kinds of things. So we collected quite a bit of data at these sites. This was the leaf temperature data, and this is going into July. When your leaf temperatures get above this yellow line somewhere around 94, then you start moving into moderate water stress. As you go over 104 or 105, then you're leaning into the higher pressure bomb readings. You're leaning into higher water stress. As you go above 110, then you impact fruit quality just by temperature alone. So this is basically July, and then we had a little spike here. They put on sufficient water. I'll show you that slide now. Here they actually put on 6 gallons, and it was sufficient to hold it down below. During this event, they put on 10 gallons, and they spiked. So whatever they did during that heat event wasn't enough to hold the temperatures down to an acceptable level. I'll zoom in on this. You can see we had 3 days pretty much that we spiked temperatures. This is 120. So I'm looking at that thinking that was probably a canopy temperature of about 117, maybe 116 here. And based on that research and based on the feedback we're getting, that is high enough to impact fruit quality. So the lesson there was, given this Cabernet Sauvignon on 5C with this deeper loamy soil, 10 gallons wasn't enough. They're gonna need to apply more than that. Well, in that same vineyard, we measured the gravels here. We knew the gravelly, rocky stuff. Here it is. It's gravelly, coarse sandy loam, very gravelly, coarse sandy loam, very gravelly, coarse sandy loam with 20% cobble. So this is just a rock pile. We've got a different rootstock here. We've got 110Rs instead of 5C. It's a deeper rooting, more drought tolerant rootstock. This is what they did during that first heat spike there. You can see we had a couple of other ones earlier on that weren't present in the deep loam, where they just touched above the higher threshold. Even with 20 gallon application, they went a little bit over 20 gallon application here and still weren't able to hold that canopy below that threshold. I'll zoom in here. You can see we put on a lot more water there. We didn't quite get the 118, 17s, but for 5 days in a row, we had those things, in particular these 3 where they're over 110. And this 4th one here, we had temperatures in that canopy that were not good for fruit quality. So in this example, 20 gallons isn't enough. So we're able to look at this, see what you apply, when you apply it, and whether you're able to hold those canopies down in a zone where you will not impact fruit quality. Now, here's another one, 110R, rocky soils. We had a spike here early. They pushed water. In this example, they were able to do it. We were able to put on enough water through the drip system, and that during that, I should have pointed that out. It was that heat event, the 5th, 6th, and 7th of September. We were able to hold the leaf temperatures down just through applying water through the drip system. So one of the more difficult water management questions we have now is, how do we manage these heat spikes? And so looking into this data, it at least gives me some hope that we can just use drip irrigated water to do that. So conclusions. Okay, water application should be directed by soil type, available water holding capacity whenever possible. You can see that if we tried to run 20 gallons across that entire vineyard, we'd have been wasting a lot of water. They were able to channel the 20-gallon applications into one specific zone without having to push it all the way across the vineyard. So knowing your soils and having your rootstocks in the right soils and being able to push more water to those areas that need it while pushing less to others is going to stretch your water application. It's going to stretch your water resources, help you manage them better. The other thing is don't apply water unless the vineyard is at or near the trigger point. Again, it's going to be hot outside and you need to irrigate. If you're in full bloom and you think you're coming under water stress, I tell you to irrigate the thing, because you don't need to be under water stress at bloom, because they will shatter. But if you've got a vigorous growing vineyard, the crop is set, and it's going to be a pretty hot day, but your soil moisture is there and the vineyard is growing just fine, you probably don't need to irrigate that. You can save your water resources for a time when you do. Both temperature and VPD are important. A real critical threshold for higher water stress and those real high temperatures is when the humidity gets below 20 to 15. If it gets below 15, that's quite an event. But as it starts to get below 20, the VPD really skyrockets, and you need to be aware of that. And again, we can apply enough water to the drip system to cool the vineyards during some high heat events. And I believe the temperature in that one, we had an ambient temperature of 118 and 119. So that was in one example at 118, they weren't able to cool it. The other example, it was 119 at that particular vineyard. They put on enough water to successfully cool it. So other considerations. This is the other things we're looking at. Shade cloth. We're measuring that. We're looking at the effect of shade cloth on the fruit and also the leaves. And my advice first of all, shade cloth is expensive. It's expensive to buy. It's expensive to put up, and you got to take it down. And it costs a lot of money it's an expensive mitigation. I would suggest that you'd use trellis and grow enough leaves and not overly leaf to where you need shade cloth. But if it's getting so hot that even your leaves are overheating and you don't have the water resources to cool them, you could use shade cloth to shade the fruit and the leaves, because we've done those measurements where they've just shaded the fruit, but our canopy still got too hot. So that would have to extend from the top of your trellis down to the cordon or to cover the fruit in order to shade both the fruit and the canopy. These little misters or foggers, we're looking at that. I'm hoping to be able to install a few systems in some vineyards that have those to see, number one, when we should turn them on, what the effect is on the leaf temperatures and just how effective they are. I think they'll be effective, but I haven't measured that yet. Variety and rootstock impacts. Most of what we're working on now is Cabernet. We have some Zinfandel and Merlot and a few other varietals, but we're hoping to expand our work to more different varietals here in the near future. So we're going to be looking at variety and rootstock and water holding capacity, and just get a good feel for how much water you would need to apply under those situations to give you a ballpark number to start with, and to be able to cool them. Okay, last one is vineyard design. I put this last because I'm focusing more on what are we going to do with the vineyards we have. Now, vineyard design, the height of the cordon or the height of the canes may come into play if these heat spikes get more prevalent, or if the heat gets higher. The higher the cordon is from the soil surface, the less likely you're gonna encounter problems with reflectance. Reflectance off of a dark soil or a red soil up into the canopy is a significant problem, and that can cause your fruit to overheat. As you lift them up and get them higher off the ground, there is a significant drop in temperature to where you could lessen the effect. The other thing to consider is soil cover. You're going to go and mow under the vines, or you're going to mow your cover crop and scatter the brown straw or the kind of yellowish brown straw across the soil surface, versus something that's a disc. The bare soil will reflect more heat up than the mowed cover crop. So there's some things with vineyard design, row directions and cordon height, and how we manage the vineyard floor that we're looking into, and we're making measurements on, and we're learning more as we go. So I think that's all I had for today. Yes, that's all I've got. I think I moved through that pretty quickly, but hopefully I gave you some good information.
That was fantastic, Bryan. Thank you so much. It does not look like we have any questions in the chat room right now. So we'll go ahead and turn it over to Will Weiss, who's going to discuss voluntary actions and ongoing relations with the State Water Board.
Hi, everybody. I had some connection issues earlier. I'm wondering if I can be heard or seen.
Yes, we can hear and see you.
Terrific. Okay. I'm going to keep my talk fairly brief. Thank you, first of all, to the Winegrowing Commission for putting this together, and to all the other folks who've spoken thus far and who are slated to speak after me today. I feel a little not underprepared, but just that I might disappoint some of you with not having quite the volume of scientific information as the last couple of speakers to offer. However, what I am here to speak to you about today is in fact about science and the way in which we use water in the vineyards. You heard from Noelle Cremers first today, or first among the speakers anyway, regarding the ongoing situation surrounding the Clear Lake hitch, the amount of attention that's being given to that for good cause with respect to the species dwindling numbers, and the great deal of attention that's being put on water use around Lake County as it may be impacting stream flows, Clear Lake hitch spawning habitat, etc. The group that I am here to represent is a small but growing group of wine grape and pear growers around Lake County who are committing to a set of voluntary actions and participating, broadly speaking anyway, in a group that is taking shape that we're calling the Lake County Land Stewards. I'm happy to talk about that at length, either at the end of this talk or one-on-one with folks if they have questions. But essentially, the voluntary actions that we're committing to include information gathering, information sharing, and expert analysis of that information. The information gathering component consists of stream monitoring equipment, which we have begun to or will be beginning to install in the coming days around Lake County on the 5 major streams that feed into Clear Lake that are at least of significance for Clear Lake Kitch purposes. So stream monitoring, well monitoring. We have instruments installed in certain wells around various farm properties in Lake County, and more of that going in, and again in the days and weeks to come. And we have on an ongoing effort to develop and streamline a voluntary reporting process for growers of all sizes and types who use irrigation, overhead irrigation for frost protection. The information sharing component of this effort involves delivering to the State Water Resources Control Board and other state regulators as necessary information regarding these farm practices. But the effort underway would also incorporate the input of a third-party analyst, an expert hydrologist and/or hydrological engineering firm, which will evaluate the pooled data, whether it's from those different instruments I was talking about or the voluntary frost protection reporting program I just mentioned a second ago. But all these data points will be essentially incorporated into a modeling of the water use by agriculture in Lake County as it pertains to frost protection. Involved in all of these voluntary actions are costs, the tech costs, money to buy and install and maintain. The expert third-party analysis, of course, is a service of some substantial cost requirement. And of course, the human capital overhead and general management expenses involved in gathering, recording, and submitting data of the type that I'm talking about, all are considerations that we, the group, are talking about, and we, the group, in concert with the Lake County Farm Bureau and the State Water Resources Control Board, we are having an ongoing conversation about where the money will come from to cover those costs. I'm going to skip through a little bit of what I had planned to talk about here, just because I want to make sure I leave time for questions, and I realize we're all hoping to be off of this thing in 21 minutes. But I'd like to make sure I end with notes regarding what those of you listening in can do if you are interested in participating in the actions that I've up to this point discussed. First of all, if you are willing or able, contact me directly. My information has been shared throughout or through the Winegrowing Commission for this talk. Contact me directly. I'd love to talk to you more. Love to fill you in on some more of what we're working on and talk to you about the possibility of getting involved. Second thing, log your frost data. It specifically where you're frost protecting, how much water you're applying, when you're turning on, when you're turning off, and ideally the temperatures at the times that you're turning on and off. Along with, if you go so deep into it, things like dew point are also, we feel, relevant data points to be tracking with respect to our frost protection decisions. Lastly, I believe there's an effort underway to gather folks together for volunteer efforts around the Clear Lake Hitch, specifically around monitoring for the hitch in streams. Obviously, more data about when they are sighted, and literally just sort of a day-by-day count of if spawning is occurring is a very useful bit of information that always needs additional eyeballs. And then there are groups working to actually rescue stranded Clear Lake hitch. And as many of you know, listening to this call or presenting, there are a few different places around Lake County where Clear Lake hitch spawning and the stream flows wind up crossing some barriers and crossing some areas where flows are minimized due to the amount of debris and other things in the stream. And in those cases, when hitch are stranded or wind up in a disconnected portion of the drainage that leads into those tributaries, they are netted, put in buckets with aerators, and brought to the state park for release. In fact, I'm aware of some rescues of this exact type that occurred this morning. I wasn't part of them, but I was there just after they were finished and got a readout on that. Happy to fill folks in if they're interested. But that kind of touches on the various things that my group, the Lake County Land Stewards, are working on. We are certainly open to input and contributions from willing parties. So that is most of what I had to say. Please, any questions?
Thanks, Will. We'll give it a second just to see if anyone types in anything. I don't see anything coming in. Are you able to stay on the rest of the seminar just in case? Thank you.
I'm intending to, yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, next up we have Allison Jordan, who's going to discuss water efficiency tools and resources.
Hi there, just trying to get my video on for you. Great to be with you all. And I think you've gotten a lot of really practical information so far, but I'm really hoping to give you some tools and resources that you can take away and look at after this webinar. And hopefully by this point, you are all now familiar with the California Code of Sustainable Wine Growing. This is really a collection of best practices and along this continuum of sustainability that was put together by Wine Institute, the California Association of Wine Grape Growers, and many, many partners from academic institutions and government agencies and many others, including some folks who are on the call today, some of the experts you've already heard from. And of course, as part of this very comprehensive code, we also have a chapter devoted solely to vineyard water management, both on water use efficiency as well as on water quality. And this will give you a sense of some of the topics that are covered in that chapter, everything from your overall strategy to a lot on irrigation and also measurement, creating a water budget, those types of things. And so I would encourage you to look at this if you haven't already as a really great starting point. And this will give you a sense of how the code works. So basically, it's a self-assessment tool. So you're evaluating your own operations within these categories of scoring 1 to 4, and 1 is sort of minimal levels of sustainability or where it exists, existing regulation. And then it moves up through category 4, which is considered the most sustainable, but really that depends on the operation. So I would say category 2 is generally best practice, and often where we set the prerequisite requirements for certification. But it may make sense for you to consider moving to 3 or 4, depending again on your operation size, scale, what your impacts are. So worth looking at this because I think it really gives you a good blueprint for how to continuously improve. And then there's also a lot of educational content included in the code. This is just one example, but throughout the code, you'll find various resources that link, sort of shorter blurbs that link to many, many more resources. And again, we had input from experts around the state, so it really is a valuable resource. One of the things that is, I think, especially valuable about the self-assessment, and this is if you're a participant in what we call the SWP or the Sustainable Wine Growing Program, is that it's now all online, and you can then, once you complete it, generate these customized reports. And this is an example of a comparison of a single operation between different years. And so you can see where improvements have been made, maybe where some practices have fallen backwards, and you basically can look at it and decide, is this something that needed to happen, or is it something that I want to make sure that I'm focusing on for the upcoming year? And you can also generate reports that allow you to compare yourself to others in your region, to the state, and in some cases by size as well. So worth looking at that. We also have free online performance metrics that are available for all California vineyards and growers, and you can store your information. It basically, you can see all of the different vineyard profile information that it includes. And then for the water use metric, we're really looking at acre inches applied per acre. And this includes frost protection if applicable. And again, there are customized reports that you can generate. In this case, it's all of your own operations. So if you have multiple vineyards, you can look at that, but you can also look at trends over the years. And again, this might point out, at least make you pause and ask why your water use went up in a particular year. And there may very well be good reasons for that, but it also may be that you need to take a closer look at your irrigation system or practices. So just a really useful tool for you to explore. And speaking of resources, we have created an online library. CSWA, the Sustainable Wine Growing Alliance, was first created in 2003. The code was first published in 2002. So over the years, we've added hundreds of case studies and videos and different tools and resources. So this is a way that you can search by topic, including for water use efficiency or water conservation in vineyards, those types of searches. And just to point out, one of the more recent tools that we added, this was part of a project that was funded through a grant, and we basically created this vineyard sustainable water management tool that's really designed to help you create an effective sustainable water management strategy that helps save both water but also money. So it includes an economic analysis. And as you can see, it has a whole host of things that it covers, including vineyard layout, irrigation, scheduling, monitoring, and other water uses, including frost protection, dust control, cover crops, etc. We also have resources on distribution uniformity. So there's a guide for testing. We also have a data sheet template that you can fill in. And we also make a lot of our resources available in Spanish, often have videos that show you how to use different tools and resources, as well as case studies about other growers and their experiences. And I will also mention briefly certification. I think this is really helpful for those that want to be talking about their sustainable practices. Obviously, it's most important what you're doing on the ground, but for those of you that are selling grapes to wineries that are interested, or for wineries that are selling into markets that care, this can be a really helpful way to really enhance the credibility of your claims. And we also hear from a lot of growers and wineries that it can be helpful really just to help keep people on track on your team, making sure they understand what your priorities are, that you're making those improvements year after year, you're meeting the certification requirements. So basically, these are the list of requirements, and there's a lot more. Our team is always happy to help people get involved and to get set up in the online system in a way that makes both self-assessment, which is just purely voluntary, or if you opt into certification, basically help you get started and set up in our online system and help you with all of the different steps that are needed. And then with that, we're able to generate these annual reports, basically pulling in all of the certified vineyards and wineries data. And again, it really shows this high level of adoption of practices, which can be a really useful tool for Noelle and those of us who are working in Sacramento or DC or internationally to really convey the work that's happening on the ground in the California wine industry. In addition to these annual certification reports, we also compile our big California wine community sustainability reports that also highlight some of the other California programs every 5 years, because that's an important part of the California story. So hopefully you find those materials useful. Please always feel free to reach out to myself or at info@sustainablewinegrowing.org, and we're happy to point you in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Allison. Will, we don't have any questions for you, Allison, but it looks like we did have one come up for Will regarding his chat. And Will, we're wondering if you can discuss the anonymity component of gathering data and sharing that. And it looks like Will is maybe not on. I'll see if we can get him back on before the end of that, or before the end of the seminar. But for now, we'll go on to Erica, who's going to discuss assistance programs for natural resources conservation.
I'm so sorry. I heard you address me there, and I got cut off. Did you have a question for me there, Megan?
Yes, Will, if you don't mind, can you discuss the anonymity component of data gathering / sharing for us real quick?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. Again, sorry for the ongoing technical problems here. So the thought here is this, that certain growers that we've approached to participate in the group that we're putting together and the information gathering efforts that I described, certain folks have said, well, happy to share that information with the State Water Board, but am reluctant to do so for fear that other parties concerned about the Clear Lake Kitch and who are non-governmental actors, not regulators, but neighbors, if you will, here in Lake County. There are folks who are unwilling to share information or reluctant to do so for fear that their neighbors may pick on them, or may not just pick on them, but file lawsuits against them if they find objectionable the way in which they use water on their sites, whether or not it's legal or within the confines of what regulators are asking for. And so the anonymity, as you put it, Megan, component is as such. The growers involved would like to gather the data that I've described and share it with a third-party expert of who meets the approval of the State Water Board and other regulators, for that person to conduct analysis of that data and then to report on that data in a form that does not share individual site-by-site key details, that will allow the State Board to and its engineers to understand all that they need to regarding our watershed and the ways in which we use water, but not provide fodder for frivolous lawsuits. So that is the nuts and bolts of what we're attempting to do. I presented at the State Water Resources Control Board's meeting last Tuesday, voiced these concerns, was assisted in doing so by members of the Lake County Farm Bureau team and by Noelle Cremers, also on this call. But it is yet to be seen exactly how that will play out, or whether or not the State Water Board or its staff will accept aggregated data or anonymized data. These are essentially synonymous in this context, but whether or not this information will be accepted in an aggregated form is still yet to be determined. But we're working to try and provide, like I said, a robust set of data and data that would be collected on an ongoing basis, drought or no drought, in hopes that this will convince regulators to allow us to lead in these efforts rather than being regulated with a hammer, so to speak.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Will. All right, Erica, I think we're ready.
Okay. Anyway, I'm very happy to be here with all of you. There's a lot of people I remember from when I was working at the Lake County Wine Grape Commission, and so it's fun to be back. And I will be starting as the district conservationist for NRCS in Lakeport for Lake County in April. And so it's an opportunity now to let you know about some of our programs that can help you with some of the things that all these speakers have been talking about today. So I'm trying to see if I can figure out the slide. There we go. Okay. So some of you may not have worked with NRCS before, and just to give you a really brief introduction to how we work with landowners. So it's basically what we call people who have working lands, forest land, cropland, and rangeland. And you work with us on a voluntary basis. We're not a regulatory agency. We don't report, if there's something that we notice, we may tell you that could be a regulatory issue, but we're not in contact with regulatory agencies. And so our objective is to help you improve natural resources. And there's some financial programs and also technical assistance available. And so yeah, eligibility, you need to be in agricultural production, demonstrate control of the land. So sometimes people we work with are leasing the land, but that is still, and sometimes they're owners. And then you need to meet the adjusted gross income limitations, which are an average annual adjusted gross income of right now. The limit is $900,000 a year. And that's for the financial assistance part. eligibility. So the way you would work with NRCS is to contact your local field office, and I'll give contact information at the end. And then we talk with you, find out what your concerns are, what you're trying to do, and often have a field visit to look at things on the ground. And you'd submit your application. Steps 3 and 4 can kind of alternate depending on where we are in the funding cycle. We'll complete an inventory if it's needed of whatever the natural resource issue is that you're trying to address, develop some alternatives and discuss them with you, and come up with this project that will then be ranked to determine funding selections. So projects are ranked based on the degree, the number of natural resources that you're addressing. And then if you're funded, we go on to complete the environmental review and give you guidance so that you know what you need to do in order to meet our standards and then be paid for that practice, that thing that you've done. And yeah, just quickly, one of the jargon words that we use a lot is practice. And by that, we mean either a management practice. So it could be, soil moisture monitoring and guiding your irrigation scheduling, or it could be physical infrastructure like improvements to your irrigation system. So I'll keep saying practice, but these are the kinds of things that we can potentially fund for you. And then, and also just to let you know that you complete the project and then you receive payments. And it's usually pretty quick right after. And the other thing to know is that our funding often does not cover the entire cost. So it's good to know at the start whether it's going to work out for you. So what are the kinds of things that we can help you with, the kinds of practices? Irrigation system evaluations. So Noelle, Allison was just talking about how you could look at drip uniformity. You can also sign up to have a professional look at your system from, all the way from the pump out to the drippers or the sprinklers. Irrigation system improvements would be something like replacing impact sprinklers with drip irrigation that would conserve water, or a frost system that is impact sprinklers to one of those micro irrigation systems. And then we have a management practice called irrigation water management, where you would install some kind of monitoring and use it to improve your irrigation scheduling. And then we are able to help with building ponds and pond liners if there is a natural resource benefit. So, and also if there's the proper water rights to store water in the pond. So that can be complicated. Surface water diversions would be an issue. And then groundwater sounds like is possibly an issue as well. So whether a pond will work is something that would have to be determined. If your pond is leaking, pond liner is obviously going to help you save water. So, and then the kinds of practices that we help with for water quality include a whole bunch of soil management practices like cover cropping, reduced tillage, mulch, or adding compost, and all of those things can improve water entry into the soil, improve water storage capacity a little bit. It's not going to make a big difference, and improve nutrient availability. Sometimes people don't want to do a lot of, say, compost addition because you think it'll make your vines grow too much. If your vines are really vigorous, it could be that you're going to use a cover crop to reduce the vigor. So there's kind of the whole picture of what you're trying to do. And of course, having better cover and reduced tillage prevents possible erosion and sediment delivery to waterways. We have a management practice for nutrient management. The wine grape community really has a lot of sophisticated tools already, especially through that sustainable wine growing program. But if you're interested in finding out the NRCS approach, you can talk to us. We also have a pest management practice where you would look at the pesticides and herbicides that you're using and see if there's ways to reduce the overall risk from those materials. And And then also some kinds of vegetative practices, like along field borders, along the edges of streams, to prevent any kind of surface runoff to streams. And we also have things we can help you with for aquatic habitat improvement. If stream crossings need to be upgraded, say your culvert is undersized, or it's especially if it was preventing passage of fish. Access road improvements, if you've got unpaved roads that are delivering sediment to streams. Planting along riparian corridors, either herbaceous vegetation or tree planting. And then a reminder that, for example, with stream crossings, if you're doing any work in a stream, you're going to have to get permits, and NRCS does not get those permits for you. That would be the landowner's responsibility. And so some of our programs, the big one, kind of the one I've been talking about with all these things that we do, is the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. And right now we just passed the funding selection for this fiscal year. So, but I really like to start planning with people as soon as possible, because that'll get you a much better plan that's more likely to be funded when that funding cycle comes around. Then we also have Regional Conservation Partnership Program, which are specific targeted funding sources in targeted regions for a given resource or suite of resource concerns, in this case, soil health management. And that one is still in the works. So that's for things like cover crop, reduced tillage, and funding for plans like carbon farm plans, soil health management plans. So if those sound of interest, you can talk to me about those. And then we also have a program called the Conservation Stewardship Program that still has its application deadline, April 14th, coming right up. And that might really meet some of you vineyard landowners who've done a lot with your with the sustainable wine growing program, with your operation. So this kind of is for people who've done a lot already, and then you get annual payments based on the number of resource concerns that you have already addressed, and based on your property and land uses. Payments based on the land use and the size of your property, and then you add enhancements to sort of go another step beyond in your natural resource management. And I know this is all really fast and a lot of jargon, and that's why we're there to talk to you about it all. So here's my contact information. I'm not putting any addresses since I'm back and forth between Ukiah and Lakeport right now, and then I'll be permanently in Lakeport April 10th. So best to reach me by email or cell phone. And thanks for the opportunity to talk to you all.
Thank you so much, Erica, and thank you to all of our speakers. I'm actually going to share a screen really quick before we end everything. This is all information that you likely already have. It's info that the State Water Board has passed our way. They did send letters to growers, and we also emailed all Lake County wine grape growers a few weeks ago with this information. So you likely, like I said, you likely already have it, but just wanted to share it again before we end the presentations today. I'm not seeing any other questions come through. So we will hop off here soon. But again, just want to thank all of our speakers for taking the time to present today. A lot of really useful information was shared, and we will get this all to you as soon as possible. And we'll email you a link, like I said earlier today. Again, thank you so much, everyone. We hope you have a great rest of the day.